Okay, thank you for joining me, Sam, in our conversation today about another president who's been, I don't know, ignored by history, or we don't talk enough about history. Seems like a pretty important guy. It's President William Howard Taft.
Yep, I'm excited to be here. Done a little bit of research, not enough, but we shall see how it goes.
Okay, that's good. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. Okay, so do you know anything about Taft to begin with?
So, I know that he was the 27th president.
I think you're correct with that. 26th, maybe.
Oh, I think it's
Maybe.
27th.
Oh, then you're right.
I think Roosevelt was 26th.
You were right. You're right. He was the 27th.
Yeah, okay, so I know that. I know he was also the fattest president, weighing about 150 kilos. Is what
That's
I saw,
true,
which
that's
is
true.
Absolutely massive.
There's a story, apparently, like the bathtub that he self-designed. 4 people could have a full bath in it.
Yeah,
It's that
he's
big.
Republican as well.
Republican,
He's like
yeah.
A big, fat Republican president with a mustache as well.
Yeah, but those days, I guess everyone had a mustache.
Yeah, true.
That was back in those days. But no, interesting you mentioned Republican. It's crazy, but back in those days, there were sensible Republicans. I'll even say this, like, maybe they were the better party back then. But yeah, you're going to say something?
No, I was going to listen to you about Republicans, if you could go into a bit more.
Because, like, Abraham Lincoln was the first Republican president, and then they were the party of Lincoln. They were the ones who freed the slaves. And then Ulysses S. Grant, he had helped push through the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment, and it gave African Americans the vote. They launched the war against the Ku Klux Klan. They were the more sensible party.
And then obviously Teddy Roosevelt was also Republican before him, and that's why he handed it on to Taft.
Yeah. So part of this conversation, Teddy Roosevelt is going to be a big character.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because you can't talk about Taft if you don't talk about Teddy Roosevelt.
That's the thing, I feel like, so reading about him, I didn't realise he was after Teddy Roosevelt, and I feel like
Teddy Roosevelt had handpicked this guy. Yeah.
But no one's heard of Taft. Like, everyone I've spoken to, I was like, oh, I'm doing this podcast on President Taft. Everyone's like, who? And I was like, honestly, literally never heard of him before in my life. So I feel like probably, because everyone heard of Teddy Roosevelt, whoever follows that up is a kind of a bit like,
No, so basically I wanted to buy a biography on Teddy Roosevelt, and the one that interested me was on 3 of them. Well, 3 different entities called Teddy Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, and the Muckrakers, the journalists at that time.
Right, okay.
It's written by Doris Kearns Goodwin. She's this famous historian who's written a lot of these famous books. Actually, her husband, Richard Goodwin, was JFK and LBJ speechwriter.
How do you know that? That's such good.
No, he's a great. He was one of the like most speechwriters we forget, right? Yeah. But there's certain speechwriters everyone can remember, and he's the one who wrote about like the war on poverty and.
Are there many speechwriters who are also, as in, were many presidents their own speechwriters, or?
Not that I know. So Lincoln had written quite a few of his speeches, but most throughout the 20th century, no, they had like speechwriters.
Mad.
They weren't like Churchill would write his own speeches.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but that's Churchill for you. Okay, so let's talk about William Howard Taft.
Yep.
He was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, 1 year before Teddy, in 1857, just before the Civil War. His father was active in the Republican Party. In fact, his father was a judge. In Ohio, and his father was a very demanding father. Had expected all of his sons to be very.
How many sons were there?
I think there were 4 of them, 4 or 5 of them.
Okay.
And Taft had finished 2nd in his class in Yale out of 121.
In Yale.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And then went to law school. But interestingly, he didn't take his father's advice and didn't take the advice of most of his peers because he was a brilliant student. He didn't attend a law clerkship. Instead, in his 2nd year in law school, he actually went to journalism. And that sort of shows that he was always, whilst he always had this deep affection for the law, he had this interest in politics and the news and everything.
Yeah. So that probably affected him later on because I know that he was chief
justice
as well.
Yeah, he's the only guy to have served the presidency and the chief justice. In fact, as we'll talk more about this, he had always wanted to be chief justice, and the presidency was more of an afterthought.
Really?
Yeah. Well, it's actually his wife, rather, who wanted him to be president.
His wife wanted him to be president. Well, that's where every wife wanted their husband to be president. Like.
No, but this guy was dominated by his wife.
Really?
Yeah. No, in
what sense? I had an ex-girlfriend who was very dominant as well. Yeah,
maybe.
Ended badly.
but this one was more in a good way. Gave him a good career pushes and things like that.
That's cool.
But tragically, So his wife, Nellie, what's her name?
Nellie.
Well, that's what they would call her,
Oh.
Nellie. But I think her name was Helen Taft.
Okay.
Yeah, she had come from, again, a similarly aristocratic family, but she had been a modern woman in the sense that she would smoke, she would drink beer, she'd go to the taverns, and she never wanted to be like a member of the socialite.
Yeah.
She wanted to go to university.
When did they get together? Was it the young?
I think in the 20s. Yeah, in the 20s. Those days, yeah, that's... Yeah,
Were they both at Yale together? Or?
No. So she wasn't allowed to go to university by her
wasn't
dad.
allowed to?
Yeah, this is the 1850s there, 1860s. Yeah, not a good situation. She, in fact, became a teacher in a boys' school, and her mom said, "Don't do it. You'll never get married." And she had initially said, "I never want to get married. I want to be a free woman, you know, have a happy life." And the only way she knew Taft is because she had a book club.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and she and her.
Well,
like-
he went to the book club and.
Yeah, they were childhood friends, and they would go to the book club together in the park and talk about books. We don't have those sort of people anymore.
No, I'm sure there are book clubs. I think there still are. But
Yeah, but it's not. Yeah, okay.
not as common as it was back then. We now have TVs and stuff.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, and Netflix and Amazon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's gonna be washed out. A bit.
But yeah, so she was this very modern woman in that sense.
That's good.
And when she met Taft, Taft had proposed to her. She rejected him. Then he had to do it again. A couple
She
of months.
rejected it.
Yeah, rejected him.
Jeez.
She didn't want to get married, right? And then when she did get married, she wouldn't accept Taft's shyness. Like, for example, later on in his career, we'll talk about how he got appointed to the Solicitor General. And she'd be annoyed at her husband because her husband would be socializing with old judges, right? 60-year-old men, 70-year-old men. And she's like, no, this is terrible. You need to mix with young people who are going to be more influential
So she
later
was a
on.
real pusher in his career
Yeah,
as well, basically.
yeah.
That's good. So he's got it from his family, so he's got it from his dad pushing him as well, and then
Yeah.
obviously gets a wife and probably looks at the same thing in her. So, no, that's cool.
Tragically, however, his wife has a stroke 6 months into his presidency.
What, dies? Or just...
No, can't speak.
Freaking
And
hell.
so, I know we're crisscrossing here.
Yeah, no,
So
it's good.
Teddy was very good with the press.
Right.
So there's these stories how the press would come in. There's this famous story about Teddy Roosevelt having written a book about his time in Cuba when he fought in the war. And a journalist had reviewed that book saying, you know, Teddy Roosevelt's such a narcissistic man. You know, by reading his book, someone would get the impression that he was alone in Cuba, the only soldier in
Yeah,
Cuba.
yeah.
Teddy Roosevelt writes him a letter saying, "I am outraged to find out that my wife and daughter loves your review, and you must come to our house for dinner." So he liked criticism, you know?
That's amazing.
Yeah, so he'd invite
that's
like
good.
journalists to come in, and like as he's shaving, the journalists would be in the toilet as they're talking. So
Winston Churchill did something like that once.
Yeah,
invited
yeah.
someone in while he was
Yeah.
taking a shit
Yeah.
or something.
actually, LBJ would also do that.
It's
Yeah.
such a power thing. I love that. Wow, stop doing that.
No, because because wherever the president goes, you have to go, right?
Yeah.
So say they're talking about a difficult situation, you just randomly go to the toilet, door open, do his
No,
shit,
no,
and
that's actually insane.
you want to escape that situation, right? So you'd agree to whatever he's saying, so you can leave that
That's incredible.
situation. But anyways, actually, the book that I got a lot of this information from, she was one of Lyndon Johnson's. When she was in Harvard, she wrote an article condemning LBJ. You know, he's the worst president, so and so. And the next week, she had been invited to this ball in the White House, and then LBJ was very impressed with this girl, and that article wasn't published then. So she said, "Why don't you get a job? You know, work as an intern." And 2 days later, the article got published, and she's like, "Oh my God, what's going to happen?" Lyndon Johnson phoned her saying, no, come in, and if I still can't convince you in a year, then I'm a failed politician.
That's amazing.
And then she helped write LBJ's biography.
Bloody hell, that's cool.
But anyways,
good.
getting back to
Digress.
Taft.
Yeah.
So, and that's why Taft Taft wasn't able to get a good relationship with the press, because he wanted to hide his wife's condition from the press.
Oh, wow.
Like, his wife forgot how to speak, couldn't walk, so he'd spend hours teaching her the basic greetings so no one would know.
Oh, my God.
So, yeah, and for the rest of her life, she could never.
And did people know about it, or was it like
So-
just unspoken about? Or
Again, this was the
18.
time this was in the
1900.
early 20th century.
Yeah.
And then this was a time where there was a bit of decency that, hey, let's not leak everything to the press, or even if the press knew, they wouldn't do what they do now. Yeah. And so like he shunned the press, and people who were close to him knew.
But therefore, it's very difficult, I suppose, for him to get on with the general public if there's no kind of like relationship there.
Yeah, and he wouldn't invite the press to his home, like in his residence, because he didn't want
to see his wife. Oh, Jesus, that's quite sad. When did she pass away? Did she pass away?
I think
later.
I have to check. She lived a long year. They were married for 44 years, so she lived many years with her illness.
Yeah, because even though he was so fat, he still lived until the age of like 72, which is actually quite impressive.
Which is very impressive, yeah.
Because for that size.
It's like Churchill, drink and smoke crazy, live till 90.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense. But.
Anyways, let's get back to his career. So we talked about him being a journalist in the Cincinnati commercial. He was but again, he was mainly invested into the law. He had always wanted to follow in his dad's footsteps. And had moved up the ranks of the judiciary in the state of Ohio, his state of birth. And one of his most famous cases was Moores and Co. versus the Bricklayers Union. Okay, it's this case where that he ruled. So even though his personal opinion was workers had the right to unite, and this was the Gilded Age, remember, this was terrible wealth inequality. He understood the plight of the workers, but in that famous case he went against the bricklayers, saying, because what the bricklayers had wanted to do was they had in effect put a boycott on this firm that they were having disputes with, saying anyone who does business with the firm who were called the Parker brothers, anyone who did business with this company could not employ any bricklayers. Yeah.
So doing
a secondary boycott. Right, because they were having a dispute with this guy.
Right.
And he, even though was sympathetic to unions in general, voted against, in his judicial judgment, voted against the bricklayers.
And how old was he when he did that? In terms
this is back in his 20s.
Oh wow. Okay.
His 20s, yeah. He had become a judge very early.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Was it easier back then to become a judge?
So
now it takes.
Now think about it. How many people go to law school now?
A lot.
Exactly. And his dad was a judge, so he was connected.
Right,
no, but
allowed him to climb. Again, the
opportunity. Initially, of course. No, and as you'll see, like a lot of his career was through connections, and he got promoted and everything. So after his initial time in the Ohio judiciary, he was made Solicitor General of the United States at the age of 32. 32.
Is that the youngest person to ever be?
He's one of the youngest.
Jeez.
One of the youngest. Like today's Solicitor Generals are always in the 40s, 50s. Like he's very young.
That's crazy. Solicitor General though, like what?
It's right after Attorney General.
Oh, right.
Okay, so he argues cases in front of the Supreme Court for the U.S. government.
Wow.
And he has and throughout his time in as Solicitor General, he has a good record. He wins 15 of the 18 cases he fights within the Supreme Court.
So he's good at arguing.
He's good at arguing. He's a great lawyer, but pivotally he meets Teddy Roosevelt at this time.
How?
Because Teddy Roosevelt is serving as the Civil Service Commissioner. I know this sounds very boring.
No,
But civil service doesn't have any sexiness to it.
No,
it sounds very dull. But those days, actually, that was a big contentious dispute.
Right. Okay.
Because have you seen the movie Lincoln?
I haven't. You've told me to watch it as well. I haven't seen it. Although I did watch. What was the film you told me to watch? Death of Stalin.
Did you like it?
I did already.
Okay,
I need to. Anyway,
good man.
Digress. Go on.
Good man. No, if you watch the movie Lincoln, you'll see like presidents would appoint even the smallest levels of the bureaucracy. They would have all these appointments, and basically what presidents would do is they would just give favors or political favors. When you're out of office, hey, we'll give you a nice cushioning job.
Perfect.
Teddy Roosevelt had famously championed for a proper civil service where there's examinations and there's it's a career in the civil service. Yeah. And Taft, another young man, same age, just 1 year difference, gets impressed by this man. And who isn't impressed by Teddy Roosevelt? Yeah. Such an enigmatic figure, filled with energy. So he had fallen in love with Teddy Roosevelt.
As you do.
His wife, actually, Nellie, never liked Roosevelt.
Really?
Yeah. Because she always thought that TR... that TR was so dominant, her husband would always be overshadowed by this, by his personality.
Which is kind of what's happened when you look back on history. Everyone heard of Teddy Roosevelt. No one hears of Taft. So she actually got it spot on.
It's tragedy, really.
Yeah.
Like, they had this great partnership, and we're going to talk about how it fell apart.
Yeah,
And so, anyways, as a Solicitor General, he has a good record. But then Benjamin Harrison appoints him what he always wanted, like a permanent judgeship, because the Ohio judgeship, you have to run for re-election every 4 years or something like that. But a federal judgeship is a life appointment.
That's crazy.
It's crazy in America.
Like, yeah, that seems a little bit strange that you can get appointed to something for life, even if someone then comes along who's a lot better than you.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, they've missed their chance
And
because you've come in at the right time.
If you've been following the news lately about the guy, Kavanaugh.
So 52?
52. And he could be in the court for 30 years.
Yeah.
30 years!
That's actually ludicrous.
And there's only 9 judges in their Supreme Court. It's fixed. Like, we can talk about how I think.
That's good. That's
I
good.
I think there's a solution to that. I know we digress.
Oh yes, come on, Abby, let's hear it.
Okay.
Here's a first, by the way.
No, it's not a first, actually.
Ooh, okay.
People have tried it before. Those days it wasn't controversial. So Lincoln had increased the size of the court to 10. It was from 8 to 10, and then when Lincoln died, his vice president, who was an asshole, became president.
So he said, actually, no,
So the Congress reduced it to 9, so he couldn't appoint another judge.
What?
Yeah, exactly.
Cheeky.
And then Teddy Roosevelt's fifth cousin, also his fifth cousin, Franklin Roosevelt,
Yeah.
also his niece's husband, Franklin Roosevelt,
Yeah.
tried to do the same thing. Tried to pack the courts with Democrats, because what you can do is you can pass a law because in the Constitution of America it never says how many judges you must have.
Yeah.
So the Congress can decide and try to expand the number of judges, but got overturned. But I'm telling you, if the Democrats win in 2020, they have to get rid of the filibuster. They have to pass a law saying, you know what, we're going to appoint 10 more judges.
Yeah. But I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't see that happening, but I like it.
Because Democrats are weak. They will never do the nasty thing. But anyways, getting back...
Democrats are weak.
They are weak.
Okay.
Like Republicans will do terrible things and they'll win. Democrats will do the right thing but not fight, I
don't know if that's entirely true, but you have more knowledge on American history than I do. So.
Look at this. Republicans voted for like a rape, guys who've been accused of rape, attempted rape, yeah, and they're proud of it. Democrats, if there's one small scandal against each, they're out.
Yeah.
No, you need to fight for your guys.
True. Fair. I like it.
Anyways, so and he loves, by the way, being in the federal judge. He gets appointed by Benjamin Harrison, by the way. Benjamin Harrison is the grandson of Henry Harrison, who was the shortest president of all, shortly served president of all time. No, not physically. Had the shortest reign. Do you know why?
How long?
2 months.
2 months.
Yeah, he got elected as president, and he wasn't a high-profile figure. So he said, "No one, I'm going to show." He was already very old. I think he was 68. He wanted to show he was youthful, young. So he gives a 2-hour inauguration speech in January in Washington, D.C. It's freezing, and he gets pneumonia.
No.
It is opening day, and he dies 2 months later.
What on earth? Oh,
This
that's
guy.
great. That's a great fact.
But no,
Wait, when was that?
I think it was the 7th in the 1830s, 1820s.
Yeah, that's a bit of a shit.
But his grandson becomes president. Yeah.
Doesn't follow in the same footsteps.
Interesting fact, by the way. I think Benjamin Harrison lost the popular vote. Lost the popular vote.
But won them.
Won the presidency.
Yeah. Is that what happened with
Trump as well, and George Bush.
Oh god. Yeah.
Surprisingly, it's always been Republicans
Who seem to win.
who win with that sort of situation. But anyways, he serves in the Sixth Circuit of the federal bench. He centered in Ohio, so his home state. He likes it there, but it's a terrible salary. These judges weren't paid well, so his brother had to support him.
Really?
Yeah.
What does his brother do?
His brother had started a self-business, and
But successful.
Yeah. Well, he's pretty successful as well.
Yeah, but you would have thought a judge, even back then, you would have thought they'd still get paid.
You'd think.
Have to be supported by your brother.
But that's why. No, but he also had an expensive lifestyle.
Okay, yeah.
With Nellie as a wife. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, true.
But anyways, he gives a lot of he supports unions, labor rights as a judge. One of the most famous cases is the United States versus the Addison Pipe and Steel Corporation. It's a famous case where the American government had tried to break up a monopolistic business under the Sherman Act, which was passed in the 1880s, I believe. And it was no one was utilizing it. So him, by certifying that this was constitutional, had risen the profile of the Sherman Act, which is going to play a big part in his presidency and Teddy Roosevelt's presidency. So
Does the Sherman Act still exist?
It still exists, but we don't use it.
I was going to say, because
we should break up.
Yeah, there are still some monopolies that are hanging about.
Yeah, but do you know what those monopolies have done smartly? They've just bought off the politicians.
Yeah, there we go then. So it's very difficult to. So wait, can they? It's only the government that can actually enact.
The federal government.
Right,
the federal
are
government.
the only people that are allowed to enact the Sherman Act.
No, they've already enacted the Sherman Act. They can enforce it by breaking up monopolies.
Right. Okay. So therefore, if the monopolies have enough money to pay off politicians, obviously they're going to stay monopolies. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. But those days, surprisingly, there was a lot of lower level corruption. So you'd get like a senator. Do you know senators in the United States? Yeah. Those days, senators were literally bought. So you weren't elected to the Senate. What happened was the upper house in each state legislature would appoint the senators. So these corrupt politicians would appoint who the senator was going to be, and whoever was rich could easily pay them off.
So they're just there as a dummy, basically, to be a senator. And it's like, oh, you're in my pocket. Thank you very much.
Exactly. I think it's the 18th Amendment, I have to check, which finally made elected senators.
Oh, right, good.
Like normal election, but that was much later in the 1920s.
Yeah, it took a while for that to come around.
Yeah.
A lot of corruption in American politics seems throughout history.
Yeah. I know we're getting diverted.
No,
so amending the Constitution is very difficult in America. It's very partisan. You need 66% of the vote in the both houses. You need ratification. It's very complicated. One way you could change the Constitution is if the state legislatures propose a convention. It has never happened before.
It's never happened before.
Never happened before. Almost happened with the election of senators. They were one state away for it to be done using state legislatures proposing an amendment. Then the politicians said, "Oh, we have to act, or else it's going to look bad." So then the federal politicians enacted the 18th. I believe it's the 18th Amendment.
That's impressive.
I have to check. But anyways, the Sherman Act is basically an important tool to break up monopolies, and it's going to play a big part in
Taft's and Roosevelt's. Was that throughout the day?
Yeah. Actually, it's not even Teddy Roosevelt. I always feel that he gets a lot of credit, right, for starting the progressive era. It's, a lot of the times, like, the guy who loses is sometimes as important.
Yeah, because he makes the other person actually try a bit harder. Or...
Yeah, exactly. And he, like, even though he lost, like, he might have won the argument in the end.
Yeah, so people start voting for him, and he's like,
this
is what people
want. Like, he was we should have voted for him in the first place.
No, it's the same with the whole EU Brexit thing.
Exactly. So. Like, there's a lot of regret now.
Oh, massively.
So, in the election of, I think, 1900, the Democratic nominee was William Jennings Bryan. Have you heard of him?
No.
Famous orator.
Okay.
Great speech maker, and had famously run as a populist and nearly won. And by the way,
by populist, what do you mean? What, third party?
No. He was in the Democratic Party, but populist is in, like, let's enact. You think it's obvious? Let's enact policies that the common man could support.
Yeah, of course.
Politicians surprisingly don't do this. Who wants, look at the UK in general. Like, who wants to reduce corporate tax rate? Is it a popular thing? No, but politicians would do it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Who wants to go to war in Iraq? People don't.
People don't want to do it, but they still do it.
Yeah. But anyways, William Jennings Bryan kickstarts, I think, the progressive era.
Right. Okay.
Because
and he lost to.
He lost to Iran 3 times actually.
Oh wow.
Yeah, but he lost to McKinley.
Okay.
In 1900.
Oh wow, so it's a very similar time then to when Taft came. So.
Yeah. So Taft at this time, I think, is governor of Philippines. We're going to talk about this. Yeah. I just got sidetracked slightly.
No, it's good.
William Jennings Bryan is the first one to campaign, say, look, the Gilded Age is terrible. Like the few are getting very rich, but the most of us are getting like terrible,
Being shafted.
terrible, exactly, being shafted. Terrible situation here. So he's the one who said, we need to break
For the
these.
people.
Yeah,
For
for
the
the
people,
people,
by the people.
for the people. Nearly wins, by the way, in a surprise election,
Really?
because you must remember after the Civil War, the only Democrat to have won the presidency from 1860, if you don't count Andrew Johnson, who was president but never elected, he was vice president and became president because Lincoln died.
Okay.
From 1860 to election of Woodrow Wilson, only Grover in 1912, in those 52 years, only one Democrat was elected.
Why was that? So you were saying that the Republicans back then were much more popular?
Yeah, because they are the party of Lincoln, right? The
Right,
South
right,
was
okay.
still associated with the racist
Right, yeah.
South. The Republicans had, and it was a bit. There was a lot of corruption back then, right? So they had had control of the machines of power, who could design districts and everything. America's a very corrupt system, so the districts are drawn not in a non-partisan manner, but in a very, like, whoever rules the government gets to draw the districts. It's called
Crazy.
Yeah. Anyways, so where were we? Yeah, Benjamin Harrison had appointed him to the federal judiciary in the Sixth Circuit.
In
1900, William McKinley wins the election against William Jennings Bryan, and what he does is he offers Taft the post of Governor General of the Philippines.
How does someone decide that? How is someone like, let's make you the Governor General of the Philippines? Like,
Okay, so the Philippines was a Spanish colony.
Right, yeah.
America fought a war with Spain that TR really orchestrated.
Yeah, okay.
And that's what got Cuba its independence, basically.
Yeah.
But no, America had annexed the Philippines from Spain
Right,
after winning the
okay.
war, and so there was a bit of controversy here on how should the Philippines be governed. Should it be extend should we give them full freedom,
Or should it be run by...
or should we really or should the Americans rule it?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, so there was no good people at that time. Okay, no one was saying let's give them full
Just give it
independence.
back. Yeah.
Yeah, they're
Classic.
no, but you've heard of MacArthur, the general.
Nope.
Okay, he was the famous general during World War II in the Pacific for America.
Right.
Douglas MacArthur. His father was also a famous general and was the military governor of Philippines at the time. And then Taft gets appointed to lead the civilian commission to think that, hold on, are we going to give Filipinos rights here?
Right.
What are we
okay.
going to do?
Yeah, that makes more sense.
Surprise, surprise. Let's not give them rights.
Of course.
But Taft says, let's take the power away from the military. There'll be a civilian head, which he's the governor general, so he gets to rule Philippines. And but he says that in the future we must give Filipinos their
Yeah. So
self-rule.
does he go over to the Philippines?
Yeah, he's living in the Philippines.
So he's not just like managing it from afar or anything.
No,
That's good.
but he doesn't want to take the job.
He doesn't want to.
No, he wants to be because he's got a life appointee
Yeah,
to
of
the
course.
to the judiciary, right? So he wants to be a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah.
So he makes a deal with McKinley. I'll serve in this position, but next time there's a vacancy in the Supreme Court, you have to give it to me.
Yeah.
Success or failure, like if I do a good job, if I do a bad job, I don't care.
I want that promise. That's what's going to happen.
I want that promise.
Cool.
So I think we're gonna.
And he got that deal. So that was the deal.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
McKinley agreed.
Oh wow.
McKinley agreed. But again, so far, Taft, good guy, bad guy.
He seems like an alright guy. Seems like he's quite opportunistic.
Yeah.
For example, that deal he just made there, how he's like, I don't really want to do it, but if you give me this in the future, then yeah, I'm happy to do it. And like taking advantage of how he managed to become judge in Ohio, the federal state. It doesn't seem like he's done anything wrong yet.
Except for maybe ruling over Philippines instead of giving them. But
Except that.
he's a product of his time.
But even then, I think the fact that they gave it a civilian head as opposed to
a military
head, I think that's better. Obviously, if they just gave him full freedom, it would have been better.
Yeah, man, one of the good things that he was trying to do is, so a lot of the land in the Philippines was owned by the Catholic Church. because Spain had ruled it for so many years. And he had in fact lobbied, he went to Rome, I think, and then lobbied, said, okay, colonialism by Spain is over, but we're the masters. And you have to give up a lot of your land. He kickstarted the process, he didn't see it through. Next guy saw it through. But one of his motivations was giving land to the Filipinos.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So yeah, he seems like a good guy at the moment.
In the end, most of the land did go to corporations, but
So at the moment, at this very moment in time, he seems like a good guy to me.
yeah. Okay. You see, he's a complicated figure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm gonna lean to good guy as well.
Yeah.
Mostly good guy. Where were we? Okay, so he gets appointed to the Philippines. He's civilian head, as he's being shipped over to the Philippines, he sends a message to William McKinley saying, you know, I think I have a good idea who you could appoint as your Assistant Secretary of the Navy. There's this guy called Teddy Roosevelt. He's a good guy here. You should think of promoting this guy.
Right.
And he had basically campaigned for McKinley, so he gets this job as Assistant Secretary of the Navy. And Teddy Roosevelt loves this job because he's the Assistant Secretary.
Yeah.
The Secretary of the Navy is a drunk and never shows up to work and hates Washington, D.C. because of its humidity in the summer.
So Teddy Roosevelt got to take his place
So,
and everything.
this is the day before phone or internet or anything like that. So the Secretary of the Navy would take long trips away from Washington, either when it's too cold or too hot, and Teddy Roosevelt would send him a letter saying, "Oh, the weather's terrible here. Like, you know, you are so lucky that you got to go to a better climate. You know, like if I was in your shoes, I would stay there till the end of September.
That's
you know."
amazing.
And in this time, he's orchestrating this war with Spain.
Machiavellian as hell.
You know what? I might have said something incorrect here. That's eating at my brain. I have to check
What have you said?
when America took over the Philippines. Sorry,
Don't
but
worry, it's
eating at my head here.
I'll do it. Just googling something here.
Yeah.
Listeners.
Okay, so
break.
so sorry. The Philippines they didn't get straight from Spain. I don't think. The Philippines were a Spanish colony, and with the outbreak of the Spanish-American War, I was right. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
there we go. So never question yourself.
yeah, I was right. But what was I saying? So yeah, TR loved being Secretary of the Navy because he was the Secretary of the Navy was drunk. He was
away.
Away at town.
Teddy could play.
And Teddy was saying like, "Oh, if I were, you were so lucky. Like I
Think about it
yeah,
as far
yeah."
away as possible. Oh,
And in this time, he was kickstarting another war with Spain that would open up Cuba. That would allow Americans to conquer Cuba, basically. Anyways, next point. What happens next? So I think we should talk a bit about TR at this moment because TR is quite pivotal here. So, anyways, he leaves the Assistant Secretary of the Navy to fight in the war in Cuba, which he helped launch. Becomes this big war hero. He actually writes a letter to Congress saying, "I demand a medal for this, like the gold medal for this." Doesn't get it. Surprisingly, his son gets it.
What?
His son was the American general in charge of D-Day.
Really?
Yeah, and he got a heart attack in D-Day.
Oh my god.
He was 50 odd. He shouldn't have been there in the first place.
That's still
Yeah.
crazy.
But anyways, TR then leaves the army and becomes governor of New York, and he's doing all sorts of good things in New York, getting rid of corruption. People think, "Oh my God, we need to get rid of this guy. We need to get rid of this guy." The corrupt politicians, right?
Right. Yeah.
So they think of a brilliant plan. Let's make him vice president. Because you have to remember, before Walter Mondale came in the 1970s, vice president was useless. There's a famous joke. You know the best way the vice president could go to the White House? By going on a tour. Like, they had no power.
Literally nothing.
Literally nothing. Like, if they famously, like Lyndon Johnson, when he was vice president, couldn't book an airplane flight without the president giving approval.
Really?
Yeah, like it was a slave position.
Oh my god.
Nothing like now. Now it's a really powerful position.
Very, very powerful position.
But anyways, they say, let's make him vice president, and under McKinley in his second term, like, people are going to forget TR. One guy says, "Are you guys crazy? He's going to be one heartbeat away from the presidency." But people think
like, "No, it's
McKinley's a healthy guy. Anyways, McKinley gets re-elected with his new vice president, TR. TR hates his job. He talks about resigning. He has nothing to do. He goes hiking in the Yellowstone Park or some national park, and then he gets a telegram. The president's been shot. 6 months in to the term.
So TR becomes president.
And TR
laps it up.
He gives a big address saying, I'm going to continue with what McKinley started. I'm not going to do what I want. I'm going to do what McKinley wanted. And at night, he's telling all his press buddies, I'm going to do what we've been wanting to do for all this time here. 100%. It's going to be a progressive era here. And McKinley had made a promise to Taft about being appointed to the judiciary. You would have thought that deal would have gone because he's no longer president. Teddy Roosevelt, on the other hand, sees Taft as a potential rival.
Really?
Initially, because Taft is doing such a good job as governor of the Philippines. So he thinks, how do I get rid of him as a future threat? I'll give him a post in the Supreme Court. He wanted the Supreme Court justice.
Yeah.
McKinley had promised it to him. I'll give it to him. And if you're elected to the Supreme Court, it's a
lifetime position.
Yeah.
So therefore,
you'll never be president.
Oh, perfect.
He rejects it.
So even though that's the thing he's been wanting.
Yeah, he rejects it.
Why?
2 things. 3 things.
Yeah.
His wife no longer doesn't want him to become a Supreme Court justice because his wife thinks he can be president at a later stage. Number 2, yeah, go on.
No, I was going to say, so what do you mean he was doing a good job in the Philippines? Like, what has suddenly made his wife think, you could become president one day?
Oh, because the profile of him in the Philippines, because he was a very good administrator, as a civilian administrator, he was doing a good job for America, that is.
So there were probably people start talking about it and start saying, actually, he could be president one
day. Yeah. And he was more in line with the establishment of the wing of the Republican Party.
Right, okay.
Because Teddy Roosevelt was a president by luck, right? Yeah. And the Republican Party, not the people, but the party hated him. Because he was doing all these radical things.
He was doing things he wanted to do.
Yeah.
And not listening to the party.
Exactly. So the party had a better liking towards Taft. Second thing is, Taft generally thought his job in the Philippines wasn't done. He didn't want to leave until
he'd actually
finished. Until he had finished his job. For example, the negotiations with Rome, for example.
Right, okay, yeah.
And third thing is, he wanted to be Chief Justice. He didn't want to be any old.
Yeah. So if you get a place in the Supreme Court, can you then not go on to be Chief Justice, or because you've already got that life position?
You've got that life position. It's happened once or
where they've been
twice. When the president when the Chief Justice is resigned, the president appoints one of the present justices to the to the Chief Justice and appoints another guy to fill this guy's spot. But it's very rare.
Very rare. Oh,
very rare.
Shit, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a life tenure.
Yeah, that's horrendous if you don't get the big spot and then it becomes vacant like the next week. Like, that's a bit shit. That.
At a life tenure, would have seen the rest of his life. I could have had that position.
No, I'd be a bit bitter if I was any one of those.
So apparently, what you would do is you'd keep regular updates on the health of the Chief Justice, waiting for him to die, and he had heard that that guy's really ill. So
you know what?
I'm waiting. I'm gonna wait.
Cool. Yeah.
So, anyways, he initially rejected it.
Okay.
And then TR, by this time, TR has grown in stature. Like,
he doesn't see him as a threat anymore.
Yeah, he's more confident, but he really likes Taft from his olden days, right? Good administrator. He says, okay, I see you don't want to leave this job in the Philippines because you want to see it through. How about I give you a promotion where if you are Secretary of War, by the way, this is how crazy it is. You know how Americans call it Secretary of Defense now? Yeah. It used to be called Secretary of War.
Yeah, I saw that. Actually, I saw that. That's crazy.
But I guess it's more truthful. Most of, these guys are fighting wars every day.
Yeah, I suppose there's probably more. Secretary of Defense sounds a lot more public friendly.
Yeah,
in the sense that you're like, we're defending ourselves. Whereas if you can say war, you're like, oh shit,
it seems more aggressive.
So, it seems like you're attacking others.
But
as opposed to
most of the wars that America has fought
is them causing it, or
not about defense.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyways, as Secretary of War, he gets to oversee the Philippines as well.
Right. Okay.
Just maybe not on a one day-to-day level, but still, it's a step up, and he accepts the position. Because Nellie, his wife, also wants to move back to DC.
So is this back in DC now?
Yeah, he's back in DC.
Okay.
And TR, by the way, this is the day again before cell phones or internet.
Yeah, of course.
TR would go in a national park camping for 3 months. There's no way to communicate with this guy, right? Could you imagine a modern day American president like,
See you later.
yeah, like the nuclear codes, no thank you, I'm going hiking or hunting. And he would make Taft acting president. This is again breaking protocol because the highest ranking after president, sure, vice president, but those days vice president wasn't a real position. It was actually Secretary of State. The foreign minister was the highest, as per the constitution, the next highest ranking official.
He didn't like the Secretary of State.
He did, but this guy was his closer friend.
Right, okay.
And they shared a more ideological similarities.
That's good.
And by this time, by the way, Teddy Roosevelt is doing a lot of things. He's expanding the protected land for conservation.
Yeah.
I think 1/4 of America's landmass is preserved for
Really?
for conservation,
Yeah.
and 1/3, I think that's what he did. Yeah,
Oh.
or like a crazy amount. But yeah,
That's fantastic.
no. Like they have some of the beautiful national parks. You know, Yellowstone. Yeah, exactly. He's doing a lot of things in environmental conservation, and this is going to be a tricky issue between him and Taft later on.
Really? I haven't seen this about Taft. Why? What's Taft?
Okay, we'll
Yeah,
deal
we'll
with
get
that.
there.
We'll deal with
Okay.
that. I should just quickly go through what else TR does. He breaks up. He issues 30 cases under the Sherman Act that we were talking about earlier. Starts cases against Standard Oil.
Okay.
Standard Oil is the company. You know the Rockefellers?
Yeah.
That is how they got rich. It was their company.
Really?
It's one of the first companies that refined petroleum.
Ah.
You know ExxonMobil?
Yeah.
That's the company that came out of Standard Oil. J.P. Morgan.
Oh, they haven't really broken it up that much then, have they? They were trying to
No.
break it up a lot.
Like, you know, J.P. Morgan Chase?
Yeah, of course.
The Chase part
Yeah.
was from Chase Bank, and that was a company owned by the Rockefellers.
Oh, so they've broken that part up as well.
Yeah, so like, well, they'd broken up the oil company in such a way that they couldn't control the world market as much as they did before. There was these famous coal strikes, and never in American history did the American president take the side of the coal workers. In fact, he was the first president, Teddy Roosevelt was, who invited a black man to the White House.
Really?
Booker T. Washington, a famous poet and an author, and the press had slammed Teddy Roosevelt, but he famously said, "I'll invite whoever I want to invite,"
Oh, yeah.
but he never invited him again.
But he never invited him again. Why? What did he say when he got
No, because I guess he didn't want the negative press.
Right, okay.
But he didn't back down.
Why did he get negative press? Just because back then...
He was black.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's terrible.
terrible. We're gonna get a dark side into Taft.
Is he really racist?
You
Yeah.
will see. He wasn't racist towards the Filipinos.
Okay.
Like Nelly especially wasn't, but
But...
we'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see. But
Yeah.
anyways,
Good, I haven't heard any of this. This is stuff I missed off on the internet, so this is good.
by the way, like if you do interrupt, like if you have a
No, I'm enjoying. No, you're doing well, mate.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying this.
So again, Taft and Teddy Roosevelt have a good partnership. Teddy Roosevelt thinks, okay, he supports my reform agenda. He supports like all the breaking up of these monopolies. But Teddy Roosevelt, he's impatient. He can't wait. He doesn't have the patience to get through make nasty deals through Congress to get things through. So he's using executive orders like presidential orders, but they're not set into stone, right? The next president could easily
Come and say an executive order. Done.
Yeah.
Pass it.
so it's not as stable. And so Teddy Roosevelt is worried about his legacy, and he does this terrible mistake. So remember what I said? He was initially vice president,
Yeah.
but he was only vice president for 6 months.
And then...
So he served 3 years, 6 months of the term he was meant to be vice president as president.
Yeah.
And then he ran for election, won a historic, like a good mandate, became president, and was president for 4 years.
Yeah.
So 7.5 years. After he won his re-election, he had famously said, which he really regretted, saying, after I complete my second term, I would have been president for 7.5 years.
Yeah.
George Washington left after 8 years. I would have served almost 8 years. It's more than enough than any man should have. I'm not going to run for president again. And by the way, he was only 42 when he was elected. So he's going to be 50 by the end of this. Very young man.
Yeah, of course.
He later says, if I could tear off my right arm and give it away, so long as I could go back in time and change that fucking sentence, I would.
Really? Why? Because he wanted to be president for
He
longer?
regretted it immensely. Like he was a young man. He was filled with energy.
Yeah, but
And he made a dumb promise saying he won't run for re-election.
would he have been allowed to run for re-election?
Yeah. Those days there was no rules.
Really?
Yeah. In fact, Franklin Roosevelt. So do you know how they're related? I mentioned earlier.
Cousin?
Yeah, fifth cousin, but also Teddy Roosevelt's brother's
Yeah.
daughter married Franklin Roosevelt.
Right. Yeah. you just-
So Teddy Roosevelt was the one who gave them away in their wedding because Elliot Roosevelt had died from
Okay,
being
yeah.
drunk. But yeah, so Franklin Roosevelt ran for 4 times.
And did he win for?
Yeah, won 4 times.
I don't know. Really, I thought he could only serve 2 terms.
Yeah, there was a convention that
Yeah.
George Washington famously said he didn't even want to serve a second term, but when he was persuaded to serve a second term, he said, no, look, that's more than enough time. And everyone sort of respected it.
Yeah.
And
Is there a law now saying that you can't?
there's a law.
Right, okay.
It came after Franklin Roosevelt, but from George Washington to Franklin Roosevelt, only 2 people considered breaking this convention. One was Ulysses S. Grant. He considered running for a 3rd term. Another one was TR. And
Really?
we're going to look at
He couldn't do it because then he's promised everyone that he wouldn't.
Interesting you say this. Okay. Let's keep it at that. Let's keep it at that.
Yeah.
So, as Teddy Roosevelt's second term is nearing to an end, he needs a successor.
Yeah.
He's deeply worried that the Republican establishment is going to choose another conservative candidate, not a progressive person.
Yeah.
And by the way, this is, again, how ironic is it? Those days, Republicans were the party of progressives.
That's crazy.
Yeah? Anyways, in the 1908 election, Teddy Roosevelt busts his ass off to get Taft the nomination for the Republican Party. Okay, he does all these great speeches, like,
Basically, he's telling the public, look, follow me,
yeah.
put Taft in it.
And he used a bit of corruption there. So all those political appointees that he did,
Yeah.
said, if you want your jobs, this is the guy to back, okay?
exactly. Okay,
Next
that's-
president might not keep you guys. But I've got to deal with Taft. He's going to keep you guys.
That's good.
You have to keep him. But interestingly, the person who runs against Taft on the Democratic side is William Jennings Bryan again. The one who ran against
Yeah,
McKinley.
the one who made him progressive.
Yeah, who started the
Yeah.
progressive era. And surprisingly, Jennings Bryan is running and saying he is the true heir to Teddy Roosevelt. Because he was the one who advocated these things before. Teddy Roosevelt did these things, so he's more akin to Teddy
He was
Roosevelt.
like, you followed me, if
Yeah,
anything.
yeah.
I was your predecessor.
Yeah.
and therefore
No,
I
but
should be
he
your
has a lot of
successor.
respect for Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah, of course.
But he's saying, look, I should be the one who succeeds Teddy Roosevelt. I'm more like him. And how it's become a competition on who's more progressive. So I'll give a couple of things that they
Yeah,
fought
cool.
on. So William Jennings Bryan said we should nationalize rail. Rail should be nationalized. It should be under the public ownership. Taft goes halfway, says, no, I don't want to nationalize rail, but rates should be decided by, the Interstate Commerce Commission.
Right, okay.
So you can't the private companies can't increase the fares of journeys by any amount.
Right, okay, so, yeah, that makes sense, I suppose.
Yeah, so again,
I would have preferred National Rail, but...
I would have preferred that as well. So William Jennings Bryan is a more radical one.
Okay.
William Jennings Bryan says, you know what? In those days, banks were not as stable. So if a bank fails,
You've lost your money.
you would have lost your money. William Jennings Bryan said your deposit should be guaranteed. Taft does a middle ground. He says, okay, let's not do that, but let's do postal banking.
Do you think Taft did this because that's genuinely what he believed, or do you think he was
I think
trying to get on the side?
he was genuinely more conservative.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Like, he was progressive in the sense...
And TR? What was TR? Would TR have said...
So
National
TR
Rail?
at this point...
Yep.
So, okay, good. I'm actually a bit happy that you haven't read this far. So TR at this stage is a progressive, is more progressive than Taft, but is not like William Jennings Bryan yet.
Right, yeah, okay.
Okay, so he's not for all of these things immediately. And so when this guy was saying we should protect depositors, Jennings Bryan, Taft was saying let's not go that far, but let's introduce postal banking.
Right, okay.
So you know how in the UK we can use the post office as a local bank.
Yeah.
Like the main benefit is this. Now we have credit cards and internet, but before, like, there was a post office in every neighborhood, right? There wasn't necessarily a bank in every neighborhood. So you'd have to, if you wanted to loan money, you'd have to do it through dodgy sources with exuberant interest rate. Postal services, postal banking would. Yeah, it's a public bank, literally, a lower rate. Surprisingly, America still doesn't have it. And this is the election of 1908. They were discussing this. But anyways, Taft wins. He wins in a historic landslide, in a landslide. He wins 321 electoral votes to William Jennings Bryan's 162 electoral votes. He gets 51.6% of the vote. He gets a solid majority. I think he beats in the popular vote by 9 percentages. Solid win. TR on this time, seeing that Taft is become president, he thinks, you know what, Taft needs some breathing room here. If I'm still here, people are just going to compare him with me. So I'm going to go to Africa for a year and go hunting and things like this. And the press is going to focus more on this guy. So the book, by the way, I was reading, if you want to read it, it's called Roosevelt, Taft, and the Muckrakers.
Okay, cool.
Yeah? When
was it written? I'm interested.
When was it written? 2011.
Alright, so it's quite recent. Oh, that's good.
Yeah. The first chapter is basically Teddy Roosevelt coming back from Africa.
Right.
And gets the news that his friend Taft
good, I like this.
has betrayed him.
Good.
But I don't think he has betrayed him. You know what? I'm going to leave you to determine.
Yeah.
So this is some of the good things that he does. He supports greater rights for the Filipinos.
So this is when...
he's president.
Yeah, this is when he's president, and this is when Teddy Roosevelt's away.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
He supports greater rights for the Filipinos. Yeah. He. By the way, I forgot to mention, Teddy Roosevelt offered Taft another seat at the Supreme Court for the third time, and he still refused. Okay. Because his wife was saying, no, you're going to be president, you're going to be president, you're going to be president. His wife, again, I told you, like after he becomes president, has a stroke. Anyways, he opposes, but there's already some tension in the air, with a lot of former Teddy Roosevelt supporters, because they think, okay, Taft is not going as far as we would have liked. He did lower, progressives at the time wanted to lower tariffs, because tariffs were a tax that was disproportionately affected on lower incomes, right? It wasn't proportional. And it had helped crony businesses in the United States, had made the cost of everything increase. Progressives wanted to get rid of tariffs. Taft goes in a middle way, so he reduces tariffs on Filipino exports, so increasing the income of Filipino farmers, which is good. Angered American farmers, but tariffs as a whole had actually increased because of all sorts of amendments that Democratic senators had added in.
Right, okay, so that wasn't a very good thing.
Wasn't a good thing, but it's about compromise. He was more into compromise. He said, I got something that I want, they got something they want. But anyways, like, he had supported free trade, but he hadn't been able to, like, he wanted to negotiate this free trade deal with Canada.
Right.
But then there was this crisis in Canada that, like their prime minister didn't have the support, so that deal collapsed.
Right, okay. No.
So their supporters, the progressive supporters, were saying he's not getting enough things through.
It wasn't entirely his fault.
And a lot of progressive parliamentarians, like congressmen, they tried to sneakily pass an income tax. So America didn't have an income tax before, right? It was actually illegal to have an income tax.
Really?
Yeah. And they tried to sneak in an income tax in another bill, like through an amendment. Taft vetoed it. Because Taft supported an income tax, but he said, look, an income tax through this would have been voted unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Yeah. We need to do the long, hard work. We need to pass the 16th Amendment, which they later do.
Right. Okay. What Taft does?
Taft does, but in his very last, when he's, I think, after the election, but before he's voted out.
And was it not popular then? I'm guessing.
No, it was popular, but people who are going to, like the congressmen, they don't want to do it, right? They're bought by rich people. They're all rich people, right? They don't want to do this. But so it was a big, tough battle. But this is where some people don't trust Taft, right? Like, why is he vetoing it? But he has a more judicial view, right? He thinks, no point passing this bill if the Supreme Court is just going to overturn it. We need to do the hard work, get the amendment passed. But anyways, in the antitrust measures, he does 70 measures in the cases under the Sherman Act. Roosevelt had done 40. So he did more than Roosevelt. Much more than Roosevelt.
In the same amount of time, or?
Less. He had 4 years. That guy had 7.5 years. So Roosevelt had started the action against Standard Oil. It was he who finished it and continued it. Same with the American Tobacco Company, U.S. Steel. It was a company owned by J.P. Morgan, the International Harvester Company, and this is where it comes a bit tricky. Teddy Roosevelt had, I think, a part ownership of this company, or had benefited from this company. So there's a bit of
a bit of tension when he comes back.
Yeah. No, I think Teddy Roosevelt had supported this company and given them federal orders, basically.
Right, okay.
So there was this bit of insinuation, you could say, that Teddy Roosevelt should not have given them the order. It was unfair competition. But the most controversial affair is called the Bollinger-Pinochet affair. Have you heard of it?
Bollinger, isn't that a drink? No.
It might be a drink as well.
Yeah, okay.
But, so, Gifford how do you spell this, by the way? Pinchot. Pinchot?
I reckon Pinchot.
Pinchot, okay. So, Gifford Pinchot was the chief forester, who was head of, like, they didn't have the Environmental Protection Agency then,
right,
but it was about, like, conserving the land.
Yeah.
And he was the one who appointed by Teddy Roosevelt, nationalizing and protecting all these forests and everything, protecting wildlife. And TR thought, oh, my man Taft is going to retain this guy. He's doing such a good job. He fires him.
What?
And in fact appoints this guy called Richard Bollinger. He was the mayor of Seattle at the time. And you might think, okay, this guy might be a good guy as well. This is when the controversy comes in. They find a lot of coal deposits in Alaska. And then this coal baron called Clarence Cunningham, his former lawyer, surprise, surprise, was Richard Bollinger, the guy who Taft has appointed as the head of the forestry department. And surprise, surprise, Bollinger gives the mining rights to this guy. What happens is this lower level of official in the forestry department called Louis Galvis sees the cronyism that's going on and leaks it and gives it to the guy who TR had appointed, the guy who Taft had fired, Gifford Pinchot, Gifford Pinchot. He leaks it to him saying, this is what your successor is doing. And Pinchot leaks it to the press. So that's why it's called the Bollinger-Pinchot affair. Okay?
So basically, that's horrendous, isn't it?
And then Taft does an even worse thing.
When does Roosevelt find that out? Is that
when he comes back from
so he's all done that within a year?
Yeah, well, some of those things he did like throughout his 4 years.
Like the whole Bollinger-Pinchot thing.
That happened when Roosevelt wasn't there.
As soon as he got appointed, fired him, put him in place. Here's Alaska, mine the coal there. Right.
So, worst of all, Taft fires the lower level investigator within the agency, Louis Galvis, for leaking it. And what he does is he does something even more sneaky. He gets the Attorney General, what was his name? George Wickersham. Wickersham. My pronunciation could be bad. George Wickersham to write a report saying, we're going to fire this guy, but date it 2 days before that report was leaked. So it won't look as if...
So it looks like he's done it out of spite.
Yeah, so it won't look as if he did it out of spite. But it later got leaked.
That's incredible.
So...
Oh my god.
It had created a lot of acrimony here.
Yeah, that's terrible.
And it's the one department that TR had loved, like protecting the landmass. He was big into conservation, into protecting the landmass.
Straight on.
Yeah.
That's horrendous by Taft.
Ironically, by the way, you know how much he wanted to be in the Supreme Court?
Yeah.
He got to nominate 6 Supreme Court justices. There's only 9 judges in the Supreme Court. Yeah. He gets to appoint 6. It's the most for any president after George Washington, who got to nominate all of them because there was no country before him, and Franklin Roosevelt, who was president for 13 years. But like, he appointed 6 judges. Never happened before, except for George Washington, that is. Anyways, Teddy Roosevelt comes back. Here's all these terrible news. Like, a lot of the judges he's appointed are conservative judges. You know about a lot of the executive orders that I told you that Teddy Roosevelt had did. So Taft negotiates them because he thinks that executive orders are not going to stand, right? Yeah. So he gets them through Congress. He passes stronger bills. Yeah. But in doing so, he needs to weaken some of the executive measures. because
Right, okay, so
that's it's like the famous thing, like how the sausage is made, right? You don't want to know how the sausage is made because it's disgusting.
Yeah.
Politics is disgusting, but you need to do these things.
Yeah. So he's done all these dodgy deals to try and...
Some dodgy deals, yeah, but like compromise.
Yeah.
It's not a dictatorship, right?
Basically, he just basically has weakened a lot of the stuff that
Yeah.
Teddy Roosevelt was putting
But he
forth.
made them permanent because he got the bills passed.
But I suppose if you're making something permanent, that isn't what Teddy Roosevelt...
It's not as strong, but it's
Yeah.
better than nothing.
Yeah, 100%.
Better than nothing.
But Teddy Roosevelt wouldn't have seen it like that.
No,
He would have
no.
seen it as, well,
You're sliding me.
You've snaked my...
So, what do you think Teddy Roosevelt does?
Run for president?
He runs for president.
Does he?
He runs for
What the
president.
hell?
He said he wouldn't. He said he was going to tear off his right arm. He runs for president. He runs initially on the Republican Party, his old party, wins all the primaries, but still doesn't get the nomination. Because those days, primaries didn't count for anything. Those days, the way you got the Republican nomination is through smoke-filled back rooms, right? Through briberies and like dodgy deals.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm giving you this position. Make sure you nominate
And obviously
me.
now Taft has gone and done some dodgy deals.
No, but Taft is president now, right? He
Yeah.
controls the Republican Party, so he's nominated all these new people, and they're loyal to Taft because he's given them jobs.
So now when Teddy Roosevelt's trying to come back and trying to get everyone's like, no.
Even though the public loves Teddy Roosevelt, and Teddy Roosevelt has, what do you call that? Got all the primaries, which are actual elections, but only few states had primaries back then.
Right, okay.
So it doesn't count for anything.
Weak.
Do you want to know a tragedy, by the way?
Yeah.
So back in those days, the military aide to a president was like the right-hand man. He'd be the one who'd travel with the president, irrespective of where they goes.
Yeah.
Like this, like the assistant, like a butler almost, but appointed by the military, who'd serve in the armed forces, but it's like the assistant.
Yeah.
Teddy Roosevelt and Taft had the same military aide, right? They were presidents one after another, and this guy works for the government, doesn't work for the party. And what's his name, by the way? I'm forgetting his name. Archie Budd. That's his
Archie
name.
Budd.
Yeah, it's a cool name.
Yeah, I like it.
He loves TR. He loves him like a father. TR loves this guy as a son. He sends a cryptic message to him saying, "Resign. I'm going to run against Taft." But he's working for Taft at that moment, Archie Budd. So he's conflicted.
But did he like Taft as much? As
He likes Taft as well, and he sees the trauma that Taft has gone through because of his wife.
Yeah, of course.
So he feels a lot of sympathy for Taft, and he's very stressed. He's about to go on a holiday, but then he just finds out Teddy Roosevelt's going to run for the nomination the next day. He says, "No, I'm not going to go to my holiday. I'm going to stay with you, Taft. I'm going to be with you." He says, "No, look, go on a holiday. I'll be fine. Come back 6 weeks later. We're going to be fine. You can help me there. I need you to rest."
Yeah.
Goes to Europe, enjoys his holiday. On his way back, guess what's the name of his ship?
Taft or Roosevelt?
Titanic.
Archie Budd's on.
Yeah, Archie Budd's on the Titanic, and he says to his fellow passengers, one of the passengers that survived, is saying, "I need to get back to the United States. I bet if I can talk to Teddy, I can convince him, and I can talk with Taft. I can convince them. Don't run against each other. I'm sure I can convince these two. They're like brothers. They both are fathers to me."
He dies.
Dies on the Titanic.
Oh my god. That's incredible.
And Taft feels responsible because he's the one who insisted,
Who told him to go on holiday.
go on that holiday.
Oh my god. You'd feel terrible. That's incredible though.
What great, history's filled with these great stories.
That
you know?
is unbelievable.
But, so you know how you were saying, do you think Teddy Roosevelt was more progressive or not? Yeah?
Yeah.
When he ran for the second, when he ran his third run, he doesn't win the Republican nomination. So he runs on another party, the Progressive Party. It's called the Bull Moose Party.
The Bull Moose Party.
Yeah, the Bull Moose
Did
Party.
he start this own party himself?
The Progressive Party was there, but
Right, but no one...
it was, yeah.
Okay.
And he's advocating radical things, universal health care. This is even before Britain has universal health care. This is 1912. He's advocating abolishing child labor, strictly regulating, female employment, that they can't be exploited. He is advocating minimum wage, stronger minimum wage, federal minimum wage. He's advocating all these. He's advocating civil rights here. He's running on all these things that progressives love, and he is galvanizing the country. But as a result, he splits the Republican vote. And the winner of this election is... So, by the way, the 1912 election is my favorite election to read about.
Why?
4 people, the 4 main... So
did Taft run again?
So Taft ran on the Republican Party.
Woodrow
Wilson ran on the Democratic Party. Theodore Roosevelt ran on the Bull Moose Party.
Yeah.
And... I can't remember his name now. The Socialist Party got 6% of the vote. Socialist Party in America. Now, you know what? Now I have to check what his name was.
But there were 4 people running against each other.
No, like every election there'd be like more than one guy, right? But no one gets more than 1% of the vote, right? This time 4 people ran, and they all got decent size of the vote. What's his name? Oh, Eugene Debs. Eugene Debs. He got 6% of the vote. 6% is massive as the socialist candidate.
Yeah, Jesus.
William Howard Taft, the current president, comes in 3rd. Not 2nd, 3rd. He gets 23% of the vote. This is what I mean. Franklin Roosevelt splits the Republican vote. He gets 27% of the vote. If you combine their votes, it would have been 50.
And then obviously the rest goes...
Yeah, and Woodrow Wilson got 42% of the vote. Woodrow Wilson was also ran again. So Teddy Roosevelt's famous slogan was, "I want to give people a square deal." And Woodrow Wilson said, "I want to give you guys the new freedoms." Like, for example, giving women the right to vote.
Yeah.
Woodrow Wilson didn't mean it, didn't do anything about it, but said at least he supported it. But anyways, Eugene Debs, famous socialist, was in fact imprisoned by Woodrow Wilson later on.
What?
For opposing the First World War. And in fact, it was a Republican president, Warren Harding, who released Eugene Debs. But this was a historic election. And yeah, it's my favorite election to study about.
God, look at his tash there.
Yeah, both of them. Jesus. Woodrow Wilson, by the way... Oh, by the way, did I talk about Taft's racism?
No, you didn't.
Forgot about that.
Okay.
When Taft was elected in 1908, 1909, he promised not to give any more black people commissions in the South. In fact, he fired all of them that was still there during the Teddy Roosevelt administration, like federal jobs in the South, and didn't appoint like nearly as many in the North.
So he's basically just very racist.
Racist, or rather, he might not have been personally racist, but I don't think I think it's distinction without difference, because he was saying, if I do this, I'll alienate Southern voters.
Still, he's probably definitely racist.
Yeah, you shouldn't do that. It's bigoted.
Exactly.
So, still pro-Taft, and Taft's becoming more and more conservative.
It's very hard now. I feel like he's started off a good guy. Went to the Philippines, did some good things there.
As president, he did some good things. He broke up more monopolies.
Yeah, that's good.
Codified more laws, but this environmental, the deal in Alaska was a bit disastrous.
I feel like he's been a bit Machiavellian, really. I feel like he's made friends to kind of gain his way up the social and presidential ladder, or whatever. And then he's come into power, probably promised a lot of people a lot of things. And then as soon as Teddy Roosevelt's gone, which I feel is very sneaky of him to then put in place all these politicians that aren't what Teddy Roosevelt was about. Bear in mind, Teddy Roosevelt has fought for him to basically become the president, and then as soon as he gets back, I think Teddy Roosevelt's maybe a bit, his ego's got a bit of him, because he then thinks, oh, you know, he's doing this all against me.
So Teddy Roosevelt also had a bit of an ego, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
Even though a lot of these things that Taft did were actually pretty good, he codified these protections. Like, Teddy Roosevelt took them as a personal insult.
Yeah.
I don't think necessarily he was corrupt. I think he just didn't go as far as Teddy Roosevelt wanted him to.
Yeah.
But he codified it. He made them permanent, these great protections for workers' rights. And he's the one who got the 13th Amendment, sorry, not the 13th, the 16th Amendment passed. The one that got an income tax. It's hard to say.
You can see what he's like, and you can see that his law background has clearly had a massive impact on how he's kind of run his presidency.
Yeah.
But then after that, he goes on to be.
So we'll talk about this. So
okay, but at the moment, I think he's.
He's not a great president,
He's not a great
but he's
president
not a disaster of a
It's not a
president.
disaster because everything he's done or everything he promised that he was going to do, he didn't quite do as radical as he thought. And it's probably to appease a lot of people.
Yeah.
And he probably tried doing everything by the law.
Yeah.
As opposed to more like Teddy Roosevelt, who's just like, no, we can do this. I want to do this. Executive order. Executive order.
Teddy Roosevelt wanted to go further.
Exactly. So you can understand why he's probably not liked as much or remembered as much in history because he felt like obviously the law of it. He was trying to stick to by the book.
Yeah, and he like a lot of the things that Theodore Roosevelt did, a lot of those executive orders were overturned
within a year.
Within a year, right? Or like by the Supreme Court. Yeah, exactly. For example, this famous case was forgetting what it's called, New York versus forgetting which one it was, where the New York government had set up the number of hours, like a 60-hour work week and a 10-hour work day for bakers, and the Supreme Court said, no, you can't introduce these sort of restrictions. So a lot of the things that TR did using executive orders, they were broken up by the Supreme Court.
So maybe Taft was actually more effective.
Yeah, and he did more cases against monopolies than Teddy Roosevelt.
70 as opposed to 40 or 30.
30 in 8 years. Taft 70 in 4 years.
But that's probably purely because of his law background.
Yeah. But anyways, the election of 1912 also breaks apart their friendship.
Yeah, you can understand. You can completely understand if he comes back, but from...
So Doris Kearns Goodwin says, the author, she always says that if only, like they'd come to an agreement, because Teddy Roosevelt was young, Teddy Roosevelt could have easily waited for Taft to finish his second term and run in 1916. He would have won easily in 1916. But he couldn't wait, right? And he also had a bit of ego, Teddy Roosevelt. Or Teddy Roosevelt could have said, look, don't run in 1912. I'll give you that seat in the Supreme Court that you always wanted.
Yeah.
It works both ways.
Very tough. But it's quite interesting in the sense that Teddy Roosevelt at first didn't want Taft to be there because he thought it felt him as competition, so he sent him out to there. And then it works out that in the end it actually is that direct competition that screws him over. So it's ironic, but yeah, crazy.
Anyways, after this disaster, Taft is all demoralized. He doesn't speak to Roosevelt. Like a lot of what is it called?
Intricately?
No, people who try to bring people together. Interlocutors.
I trust you on that one. I've never heard that before, but I like it.
Damn it, I'm forgetting the word now. No. Anyways, people try to bring them, but no, they had too much of an argument. They couldn't get back together.
And their egos are too big. Clearly, Teddy Roosevelt, neither of them would apologise.
No. So, I always like a happy ending. Okay. We're going to get a bit of a happy ending. Cool. So, by the way, after this, Teddy Roosevelt goes to the Amazon with his son to discover like another part of the the Amazon. Gets malaria, gets blinded in one eye, gets in terrible illness. The mission ends in disaster. When he comes back to the United States, there's no big hero's welcome that he got when he came back from Africa. He's depressed, he's severely ill. His son goes to fight, all of his sons goes to fight in World War I. His youngest son dies. And this guy, as president, had always wanted to fight in a war. He was always sad that as president he never got a war. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, by the way. Teddy Roosevelt was actually a Nobel Peace Prize winner. Exactly.
Why?
So, Teddy Roosevelt, big warmonger, right?
Yeah.
You know the Panama Canal?
Yeah.
It was actually, there was no country called Panama before. It was part of Colombia. They wouldn't grant Teddy Roosevelt to make a canal, so he sponsored a coup within that region and created a country called Panama.
To then
to create the Panama Canal. So anyway, a bit of a warmonger, but he actually ended the 1905 war between Russia and Japan. It's called the Portsmouth Agreement. I'm forgetting. I remember studying it in school. Hold on. Secretary of War. It's called the Treaty of Portsmouth. Yeah.
How did he get that?
And his Secretary of War at that time was Taft. Yeah. He had went to Japan a month before the conference to fish out what the Japanese views were, told them what the American views were, and helped ease exactly. Forgot to mention that earlier. But anyways, Teddy Roosevelt comes back to the United States, ill. All his sons. He in fact, when war breaks out in the Americans entered the war in 1917. He, at this terrible age, wants to enlist, and Woodrow Wilson can't stand this guy, right? He was his opponent in the last election, so he refuses, thinking that if he gets injured, he's gonna come back and he's gonna run for president again. He's gonna win. Yeah, but he's blind, by the way. He
blind in one eye.
Yeah, blind in one eye.
Okay,
Terrible state. No state to fight in the war.
Yeah.
Pushes his 4 sons to go. His youngest son dies. And he's devastated. So in the last few years of his life, he's the shell of a man. And in one day, Taft is in Washington, D.C., or I think New York, and is in a hotel, is given a speech. And as he's going down the elevator, the lift man says, by the way, President Roosevelt is also in this hotel. Do you want to go see him? And he says, yeah, take me to him. Sees him, gives him a big bear hug, and yeah, all is forgotten. Jeez. They start writing letters again, and yeah, that's the last time they saw each other. But Taft always said, I was so grateful that I got to end my relationship with TR on a good terms.
God, that's crazy. And then when did Teddy Roosevelt die?
I think 1919. Wow. So anyways, Taft is having a bit of a miserable retirement as well. He never got to be be in the Supreme Court, never got to be Chief Justice until Warren Harding gets elected as president by 60% of the vote, like a record vote in the election of 1920, election of 1920. And Warren Harding, a month before he dies in office, in general, a failed president, Warren Harding, because of the Teapot Dome scandal, appoints Taft to the Supreme Court.
Why? Did they know
as
each
Chief
other
Justice?
before?
Yeah, they knew each other. And he was this famous. He was a Republican president as well. Like he had always wanted to be in the judiciary, and he served for 9 years.
And then passed away.
Passed away as Chief Justice, I think.
A month before. That's amazing. Jesus. And what did you do as Chief Justice? Were there any massive cases? Because I suppose 10 years or 9
So
years.
those days, the Supreme Court was a very conservative Supreme Court, but
Right, okay.
you have to understand that even like he was a Republican, right?
Yeah.
And throughout the 1920s, there were only Republicans in the White House,
Right, okay.
so there wasn't massive controversy.
Right, okay, that's good.
But yeah, what do you think?
I think so. Wait, so he ended his presidency in what 1908.
Yep.
So then, what was he like during the war? Like,
Who are we talking about?
Now
Taft?
we're talking about Taft. Yeah. Did he
Wol-
have any children as well?
Yeah. His son served as senator as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
He ran for president as well. His son, not as
And
successful.
did very well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ran against Eisenhower, for the Republican nomination.
Okay. And did he do anything?
But he
like that?
became more and more conservative.
Right. Okay.
More and more conservative.
Okay. Yeah. In general, I think it still goes on for what we were saying before. I think he was a good president. Oh, not a good president. He was all right. The things that he was running for, all the progressive stuff, I think it's great. It was a great period. But to follow on from someone who was very radical and then to almost live up to the expectations of what he wanted and then not be able to achieve it on anything. It was more like what was the other guy's name who ran against him first?
William Jennings Bryan.
William Jennings Bryan. You're probably right in the sense that you've said that he started the progressive era in the sense that because he wanted these things, Taft was like, yeah, we'll go half on that. Yeah, we'll go half on that.
I'm sure he might have even believed in this.
Yeah, exactly, 100%. He might have done, or he might have just seen that was a popular vote in that time.
You know what it reminds me? Sorry to interrupt, but
Yep.
like Hillary Clinton versus Bernie Sanders in the Democratic nomination. Like Bernie Sanders would say the right thing, right?
Yeah.
Let's give tuition-free public university.
university.
And Hillary Clinton would go a little bit far, saying, let's give debt-free. Some nonsense like that.
Anything like that. To just try and make sure that they're the more popular person.
Yeah.
But you don't want to go against that person because what they're saying is actually right, and you don't want to hurt anyone too much.
Yeah.
It's all very political, and I think he probably started off. It obviously started off in law, so started off very much within his own beliefs. But I think probably as he progressed through the political sphere, his opinions on things probably changed a little bit, and then he had to work out how he was going to play the public, how he was going to play towards the businesses. So I think everything he did, I think he wanted to do the best for what people thought. But it's tough. I think he was an alright president. It clearly wasn't someone who was amazing, and then for Teddy Roosevelt to get 27% of the vote
as a third-party candidate,
as Bull Moose, as that party, that just shows like how much more popular, obviously, he was as a president,
and won all of the Republican primaries that actually had votes.
Yeah, it's tough. Like,
sorry, I forgot to say this. So, in his retirement, I think he went back to. I'm reading it now. He went back to Yale Law School. As a teacher and everything. And again, I haven't read enough about his time as Chief Justice. All I know is it was a very conservative court back then.
Yeah. No, I feel like, as far as presidents go, he's definitely not the worst.
I'll take this guy above Donald Trump any day.
Yeah, exactly.
So he's definitely not a top 10 president.
No, and the only thing that he's obviously done bad is the whole deforestation in Alaska, that case there. Obviously very, like...
And the not giving black people any...
And the fact that he's racist. That's obviously never a good sign. But the fact that he managed to get 70 on the...
70 cases for the Sherman Act.
Yep. That's obviously a very good thing. So, like...
And the 16th Amendment, the most important thing. That what Teddy Roosevelt could never do, he made an amendment to the Constitution, which is permanent. You can't change that. That's why they have income tax.
Okay, I think he's a good president. I don't think he's amazing, and I think that
he's an above average president.
He's a good person to have in history to almost carry on the legacy that they started in the progressive era. Because he could have easily gone...
But surprisingly, the progressive era ended... Well, I guess they say it ended with... what's his name? Woodrow Wilson. But Woodrow Wilson was even more racist. So after the Civil War, there wasn't as a codified level of segregation as Woodrow Wilson did when he became president.
It's pretty ridiculous, isn't it? But it's a very different time back then.
Yeah, but no, you know what? Eugene Debs, the guy who ran on the Socialist Party, not a racist.
Good. I would have voted for him there. Actually, I wouldn't just have voted for him just for that.
But Bernie Sanders' hero is Eugene Debs. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, Eugene Debs reminds me of the American version of Rosa Luxemburg. She's I think, German? Like, after the Second World... she was... not Second World War, First World War. She was in prison during the First World War for opposing the war. And then after the war, she tried to establish a more socialist country. She was killed by the right-wing forces. Yeah.
Okay, so
then the Spartacus uprising.
Obviously, you've done a lot more. You've got a lot more information on the presidents than I do. Where would you rate him out of what, 45?
Interesting.
44?
Trump is the 45th president,
but someone served twice.
Someone served twice in two non-consecutive terms. You know who it was?
No.
Okay, no. So remember we talked about Benjamin Harrison?
Yeah.
Benjamin Harrison was the guy who beat Grover Cleveland in his second term.
Right.
And Grover Cleveland came back again and served two non-consecutive terms.
So Grover Cleveland?
Yeah.
God, I've never even heard of him. There we go.
He was so Benjamin Harrison was sandwiched between Grover Cleveland.
So he did one, then got beaten,
Harrison.
And then did again. Yeah. Brave for going for 3 times if you lost.
He won the popular vote 3 times though.
Oh really?
Like as I said, he won the popuper vote, but Benjamin Harrison won the electoral college.
That happens quite often.
It's happened every single time. Now that I think about it, it hasn't benefited the Democrat.
That's always been
okay. So the first time it happened was the election of Andrew Jackson versus John Quincy Adams.
Yeah.
I know we're getting distracted. We'll end with this.
Yeah.
So Andrew Jackson, racist guy, terrible guy.
All racist.
John Quincy Adams is a better guy, by the way.
Right, okay.
After he became president, after he lost basically his second term, he went back to Congress and was a huge advocate for emancipation and ending slavery, the abolition movement. But anyways, that election controversy, Jackson gets more votes, but the electoral college, no one gets a majority. So what happens? John Quincy Adams makes a deal with the guy who came in third, who was head of the who was in the House of Representatives, that if you vote for me, I'll make you Secretary of State. So,
Love that.
bit of corruption there.
Bit of politics.
Andrew Jackson came in 4 years later and beat it and defeated John Quincy Adams. But that's not good. Andrew Jackson's a bad guy. Sometimes democracy doesn't give us good results. The other time was, I think Rutherford B. Hayes lost the popular vote, and there was a controversy over who would get, I think, Tennessee or Arkansas's electoral college. And the deal was, if you end the civil rights movement, we'll transfer you the votes and you'll become president. So they ended this thing called Reconstruction. After the Civil War, the American government sent troops to the South to protect blacks. After that election, that stopped. And the other one was Grover Cleveland versus Benjamin Harrison, and then Al Gore versus George Bush, and then Hillary Clinton v. Trump.
Mental.
I'm sorry if this was a bit boring.
No, don't be silly. I've really enjoyed this. I love a little history lesson from you. Always interesting.
Okay.
Glad that you've done this on a podcast as well. I'll listen back to myself speak, and we'll see how I sound.
Okay.
How long have we done?
Oh, we did a bit long. I was aiming for an hour with 25 minutes above.
Oh, lovely. We've got loads to talk about. That's it. Next time, can we do like games and stuff as well? Like give me a few quizzes and stuff like that.
Okay, I can arrange that.
Like
I can
a little
arrange
theme
that.
tune to enter into.
Okay, so I'll actually get you, Nathan, a couple of people.
Oh yes, I love that.
Yeah, competition.
We should do that.
We
Genuinely,
should definitely
keep
do
it,
that.
yeah,
No,
totally.
no, I'll write a history quiz.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. All right. Anyways, thanks for joining us in this session. If you guys have anything you guys want to add, please leave comments behind. Thank you.
Thank you.